You wake, but it doesn't feel like your life. A soundless bell rings inside you, a gaze you cannot escape. The masks you wore begin to crack, and the shadows you exiled step forward, asking to be seen. You are not broken, only misplaced, walking beneath the wrong star. And now, the self stirs, whispering not command but invitation, to surrender, to rewrite, to hold the paradox, until devotion itself becomes your power. The threshold that finds you. You wake, and it doesn't feel like your life. Something unseen watches you, like a soundless bell ringing in your chest. You move through your days, but a part of you remains still, observing. You are not broken, only misplaced, as though you have been walking beneath the wrong star. The silence inside grows louder than the noise around you. It begins subtly. The air shifts, a room feels strange, as if a door has been opened somewhere beyond sight. The routines of yesterday look the same, yet meanings lean toward you with new gravity. A presence has arrived, not a judge, not a critic, but a lantern bearer, waiting at the edge of your awareness. You thought this was coincidence, but the truth is that you ripened into the moment when you could finally see. Jung would call it the self circling like a patient star, guiding your small boat toward its hidden harbor. The one observing you is not foreign. It is your own forgotten depth, the ancient memory that never believed you were only your habits. It is the inner king, the queen, the child you left behind. Like a mirror reflecting not your face but the pattern beneath your skin, it doesn't measure you, it summons you. Every time you stop performing long enough to breathe, you feel its gaze. By noticing, you have already crossed a threshold. The world will insist it is nothing: fatigue, caffeine, random noise. But you know better. Something has aligned: attention, breath, listening. What you attend to gathers, what you ignore thins. You have been living as an unconscious lighthouse, throwing signals across a dark sea. Now the keeper inside you climbs the spiral stairs, trims the wick, and clears the glass. The beam narrows. The waters answer. Transformation rarely arrives with spectacle. More often, it comes like evening, soft, certain, exact. You begin to notice the grammar of your days, the words that dim your own flame, the postures that betray surrender to a story that no longer fits. Dreams bring hidden doors. A stranger's words open sudden windows. Synchronicity becomes less proof and more poetry. Beneath this, what some call quantum fields, I call the living currents. The old intelligence that braids events into meaning when you are coherent enough to meet it. Coherence is not a trick, but a homecoming. When thought, feeling, body, and breath agree, the world hears you clearly, and you hear it back. This humbles you. You are not a magician forcing reality, but a participant in an ancient conversation. Yet to stand at the threshold is to feel your masks tug. Old contracts renew themselves. The shadow approaches, not as enemy, but as kin, asking, "Will you exile me again?" It is the wounded child, the forbidden impulse, the strength you once disowned. Without greeting it, every command you attempt becomes performance, and life answers not your words but your fear. Beside this comes another presence. The anima if you carry the masculine, the animus if you carry the feminine. The counterpart you neglected now waits for dialogue. When you begin to listen, your actions wear a new fragrance. Desire clarifies. You stop demanding the world to parent you, and begin parenting yourself. Observation becomes invitation. You soften your gaze, steady but unripping, like a riverbank shaping the water without force. A warmth gathers in your chest, a hearth prepared for an ancient guest. And yet, you will be tempted to fake it, to smile serenity over a trembling jaw, to speak, "Hi," words while your feet still face the door. It never works. Life responds only to what is true. So you practice honesty that is neither cruel nor theatrical. I am afraid and willing. I am tired and ready. I am not finished, but I begin. Each confession loosens a knot. Each fidelity makes the inner bell clearer. You are assembling the counsel within. Thought, feeling, instinct, image. At last, they begin to vote together on the life you will live. Outside, nothing may seem different. Inside, Everything has moved a few quiet inches closer to home. Your hands rest differently on the table. Your breath pauses before words. Your eyes soften toward people you once resented. A door that resisted you now opens at the touch of your palm. Coincidence becomes cadence. Here is the truth. The self does not demand conquest. It asks for consent. It will not dethrone your ego, but invite it to serve something greater. Command, in this language, is not a shout, but a vow. You are not here to bully reality into your shape, but to shape yourself until reality recognizes you as kin. The threshold finds you, and you answer by stepping through with clean hands. If you wonder whether you are ready, you already are. The only requirement is the next honest breath, walked faithfully into the day. The watcher within smiles, not because you have arrived, but because you have turned to face the road that has always known your name. The mask and the shadow. You have worn the same mask for so long it has learned to breathe without you. It smiles on command, answers politely, and keeps you safe within the walls of belonging. Yet behind its painted surface, another face stirs, the one you hid to survive, the one that has waited in silence. The mask is not false in the way of lies. It is protection, a contract written when you were too young to negotiate. To be loved, you silenced anger. To be accepted, you hid sorrow. To be safe, you disowned your wildness. The mask carried these bargains faithfully, and it worked. But it also buried you. Now cracks begin to form. In moments of stillness, you feel your jaw ache from the weight of pretending. Dreams carry images of masks falling into fire. A stranger's words cut too deep because they pierce through the disguise. And your own body, wiser than your defenses, grows restless in its armor. To face the shadow is to face what you disowned. It approaches not as enemy, but as kin, demanding recognition. The impulses you repressed, the grief you never mourned, the hunger for freedom you were told to kill, they gather around you. At first they appear as chaos, threatening to undo the order of your mask. But as you look closer, you see they carried your exiled life force all along. The shadow is not evil. It is the orphan part of your soul. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To hold the shadow is to stop blaming it for your exile and instead allow it a seat at your table. You tremble as you imagine doing so. What if others reject you? What if the mask was the only bridge to love? And yet, you know that without this reunion, every step toward awakening will be hollow. A king without his banished child rules an empty throne. Then, slowly, you extend your hand. In the dim light of your psyche, a childlike figure steps forward, small, scarred, but luminous. This is the you that carried your pain through winter. This is the energy you exiled so that others could smile at your mask. When you let it sit beside you, something astonishing happens. The mask no longer fits, and you no longer need it. But the shadow is not only childlike. It is also wild, fierce, sensual, irrational, all that you pressed into darkness. When invited, these energies no longer sabotage, they serve. Anger becomes boundary. Grief becomes depth. Desire becomes direction. What once frightened you now strengthens you, as if you discovered a hidden river flowing beneath your house. And in that same moment, you sense another presence, the inner counterpart you neglected. The anima if you carry the masculine, the animus if you carry the feminine. This figure, often misunderstood or romanticized, has waited patiently at the well. When you speak to it, your inner life begins to balance. You stop projecting onto others what was always yours. You stop demanding the world to complete you. The work of shadow is not tidy. It may strip away friendships, unsettle your identity, and demand honesty you thought impossible. But every time you greet what you once denied, you reclaim power. The shadow ceases to sabotage you from the dark and instead becomes ally. You learn that the mask is not shattered by violence, but dissolved by truth. In time, the mask that once felt like skin becomes just an object, a tool you can put on or remove with freedom. The shadow, once feared, becomes a companion who protects your authenticity. And the true face, long hidden, breathes its first clean breath in years. The journey deepens. The mask lies at your feet. The shadow sits beside you. And for the first time, you feel whole enough to walk forward unarmored. Learning the language of coherence. There is a rhythm beneath your breath, a music too subtle for the rushing mind. You ignore it most days, but when you pause, it gathers, a quiet alignment of thought, feeling, body, and breath. This is coherence, not a trick, not a performance, but the soul remembering its natural harmony. Most people scatter. Their thoughts pull one way, their emotions another, their bodies tense in protest. Their words say yes, while their eyes whisper no. The world answers this discord with more discord. But when your inner parts begin to agree, the field around you shifts. You notice the difference the way a storm clears when the first stillness falls. Coherence doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes in the hum of honesty. When your mouth speaks what your chest feels, when your steps follow the rhythm of your true intention, then the signals you send no longer cancel each other out. They resonate, like tuning forks vibrating in unison, amplifying each other until the whole room sings. Synchronicity begins here. A friend calls at the exact moment you needed courage. A door opens when you lay your hand gently, not when you pounded with force. These are not accidents, but responses to your coherence. The universe is not manipulated by noise, it answers clarity. At first, coherence feels fragile, easily broken by doubt, anger, or distraction. But each time you return, you strengthen it. You learn to hold the still point inside, while storms rage outside. The practice is not escape, but anchoring. Even when fear shouts, you breathe slowly. Even when chaos presses, you keep your center. The storm still exists, but it no longer owns you. To the ego, coherence seems like weakness, too gentle, too passive. But in truth, it is the deepest strength. It takes more power to remain steady in your truth than to chase every distraction. Coherence is the warrior's stance without the sword, the monk's silence that outlasts every argument. You begin to notice. The body cooperates when not forced. The heart softens when not silenced. The mind clears when not flooded. Together, they form a council that speaks in one voice. And when they do, life responds like an instrument tuned to the right key. This is not magic, it is law. What you observe with sustained, coherent attention amplifies. What you ignore dissolves. Your nervous system is the instrument, and coherence is the tuning. When tuned, you not only receive the world more clearly, you also broadcast truth in a way the world cannot resist. In Jung's language, this is the self preparing to speak through you. Not the persona, not the fragments, but the whole. When the council within agrees, the self finds a clear channel. And through it, you find the river that carries you farther than striving ever could. So you practice. You light one candle and let your breath match its flicker. You sit by the river and listen until your heartbeat falls into rhythm with the current. You write words that match what your body feels, no more pretending. Each act strengthens the alignment. Each act teaches the language of coherence. This is the threshold of creation, not commanding reality, but resonating with it. You do not need to shout. You need only to become clear enough that life recognizes you as kin. And in that clarity, you begin to discover a power both humbling and immense. Surrender to the self. There comes a point when control exhausts itself. You have pushed, forced, strategized, and still the river moves at its own pace. You realize the self does not bend to command, it waits for surrender. Surrender is not defeat. It is a bowing that opens instead of collapses. It is laying down the crown of ego and discovering that the greater sovereignty was never yours to seize, but to serve. In Jung's language, this is the moment when the self steps forward and the ego learns its proper place. No longer ruler, but faithful steward. You begin to see. All the battles you fought to prove yourself were scaffolds. Necessary perhaps, but temporary. The self was never waiting for you to win. It was waiting for you to release. In dreams, you lay down heavy weapons. In waking life, You notice how little force is required when you stop resisting. What once felt like struggle becomes rhythm, like walking with a river instead of against it. Surrender does not erase the ego. It reassigns it. The ego becomes bridge, servant, instrument. It learns to bow, to listen, to align with the currents of the deeper self. This is frightening. To the small self, surrender feels like death. But slowly you realize it is birth. The more you release control, the more a greater intelligence moves through you. You speak words you didn't plan. You meet people at the perfect moment. You sense the guidance of something larger weaving through every breath. It is not passive. It is participation in a dance. The self leads, you follow. And in following, you discover more freedom than all your attempts at control ever gave. At times, resistance returns. Old patterns cling, insisting they know better. But each time you bow again, you find yourself steadier. The act of surrender builds its own strength, a trust that grows like roots gripping the soil. In this space, you begin to sense your inner counterpart again, anima or animus, approaching not as projection but as partner. Masculine and feminine within begin to balance, no longer at war. You taste a wholeness that cannot be faked. You realize surrender is not weakness. It is alignment. A sword laid down at the roots of a tree, a crown offered to the wind, a lantern released into the river. These images remind you, what you release is never lost, only returned to its true place. And when you surrender, something astonishing happens. The world, once resistant, begins to cooperate. Doors open not through pounding, but through touch. The path unfolds not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. The self does not demand performance. It asks for willingness. When you bow, you do not shrink. You finally stand in the right posture, servant of what is eternal, partner of what is whole. And in that posture, you are lifted higher than the crown ever could have carried you. This is surrender, not collapse, but consent. Not silence, but song. The moment you give way, you find yourself carried. The resistance and the rebirth. Every threshold demands its guardian. Just when you begin to taste freedom, resistance rises. It wears many faces: doubt, fear, exhaustion, even sudden anger. The ego trembles, afraid of its own disappearance, and summons every weapon it knows to keep you inside the familiar walls. You notice it in the quiet sabotage, a sudden urge to scroll, to distract, to dismiss the voice that has been calling you deeper. Old stories return, whispering, "You're not ready, you'll be abandoned, you'll lose everything." The mask tries to stitch itself back on. The old bargains beg for renewal. But you recognize this for what it is, the last defense of a fading kingdom. Resistance is not proof of failure, it is proof of transformation. The psyche resists not because it hates you, but because it fears what it cannot yet imagine. In Jung's map, this is the encounter with the shadow in its fiercest form. The parts of you that once kept you safe now panic at being dissolved. They shake your foundations, hoping you will retreat. But if you can hold steady, something else stirs beneath the chaos, the possibility of rebirth. Rebirth is not soft. It feels like dying. Old neural pathways collapse. Old ways of being crumble. You feel stripped, vulnerable, unsure who you are without the scaffolding. Yet in this hollowing, space opens. And through that space, the self begins to breathe. Dreams shift. Instead of endless repetition, new landscapes emerge. Doors where there were walls, rivers where there was dust. In waking life, you feel drawn to acts you never considered. Silence instead of noise, honesty instead of pleasing, courage instead of avoidance. This stage hurts. To pretend otherwise is to lie. You will grieve identities you thought permanent. You will feel the pull of familiar cages. But grief itself is the midwife of rebirth. The tears wash away the old paint, leaving the raw surface for something true to be drawn. As the old self dissolves, you may feel abandoned, floating without anchor. But notice, small signs appear. A synchronicity, a kind word at the right time, a symbol in dream. These are the fingerprints of the self guiding you through the passage. Rebirth is not fireworks. It is the slow sprouting of a seed underground, invisible until one day it breaks the soil. You are that seed. The cracking you feel is not destruction, it is emergence. So you endure the resistance, not by fighting, but by breathing through it. You remind yourself, every collapse is clearing, every tear is baptism, every silence is soil. And then, one morning, something shifts. The fear that once choked you softens. The doubt that once screamed fades to a whisper. And from the ashes of resistance, a new strength rises, quieter, deeper, and unbreakable. This is rebirth, not a new costume, but a new skin. Not a performance, but a pulse. You are not who you were, and you never will be again. The alchemy of intention. Once the old skin has fallen, you stand raw in the silence. This is the place where intention begins. Not wishful thinking, not frantic hoping, but the quiet clarity of the heart aligning with the self. Most people treat intention like a command shouted at the universe. They demand, they force, they script outcomes as if life were machinery. But intention is not force, it is resonance. It is the way a harp string vibrates when another nearby hums the same note. You begin to understand. Reality listens not to your declarations, but to your coherence. If thought, feeling, and action sing together, the field around you harmonizes. If they scatter, the world answers with confusion. So you experiment. You set a small intention to speak truth in one conversation, to walk with openness in one encounter. You notice how different it feels when your body joins the vow, when your breath steadies, when your eyes soften. The effect ripples outward. The conversation changes, the encounter deepens. Intention is not fantasy, it is seed. Every thought sown in coherence enters the soil of the psyche. With repetition, roots form. With patience, shoots emerge. With devotion, fruit grows. But you also learn, incoherent intention bears nothing. To say, I choose love, while your body coils in fear and your words drip with resentment, is to plant stone. The soil does not respond to pretense, it responds to truth. This is the alchemy, the conversion of scattered desire into unified will. It is not about grand gestures. It is about consistency. Every time you align thought, feeling, body, and breath, you forge a path deeper into the self. In Jung's imagery, this is individuation through fire. The disparate metals of the psyche melted into gold. The shadow contributes its strength, the ego its focus, the anima/animus its balance, the self its vision. Together, they create an intention that is no longer yours alone, but life's itself. This does not mean you control outcomes. It means you participate in creation. You learn to listen for the right season, the right soil, the right rhythm. Some seeds sprout quickly, others wait in the dark for years. Your task is not to rush, but to tend. In time, you notice synchronicity multiplying. Paths cross at the exact hour needed. Words arrive when hearts are ready. These are not coincidences. They are the fruit of aligned intention. You realize intention is prayer without performance. It is not begging or bargaining. It is aligning. It is the heart whispering, I am ready to be who I already am. And in that whisper, the world answers. The integration and the path ahead. When the fire cools, what remains is not spectacle, but substance. Transformation is not finished in the blaze. It is tested in the quiet days that follow. Integration is the art of living what you have touched. It begins subtly. You notice your hands resting differently, your breath slowing before you speak, your gaze softening toward those you once judged. No fireworks, no angels descending. Only the steady glow of coherence woven into ordinary hours. The shadow, once feared, no longer lurks. It walks beside you, its energy transmuted from sabotage into strength. The anima or animus, once projected outward, now speaks as trusted partner within. The ego, once desperate for a crown, now bows willingly, serving the self as steward. This is individuation, the many parts no longer at war, but seated around the same table, each voice respected, each energy integrated. You feel less like fragments stitched together and more like a river flowing in its true course. The world notices. People sense a presence that does not need to prove itself. Your words carry weight not because they are loud, but because they are rooted. Even silence becomes eloquent when it comes from wholeness. Yet integration is not a final victory. It is daily practice. Old habits will return, temptations to wear the mask or exile the shadow. But now you have memory, the felt sense of wholeness. Each time you forget, you know the way back. Jung reminded us that individuation is not about perfection, but relationship, with the self, with others, with the mystery itself. You are not finished, you are aligned enough to keep walking. You begin to see your life as myth, not random sequence. Struggles become chapters, synchronicities become verses, wounds become archetypal teachers. The path ahead is not clear in detail, but luminous in direction. At night, you dream of doors opening onto landscapes vast and uncharted. In waking, you feel called to live with courage, knowing the self does not promise ease but depth. Integration does not end in solitude. It sends you back into the world with new eyes. You see others carrying their own masks, shadows, forgotten seeds. And instead of judging, you hold space. Your transformation becomes invitation. The self does not conquer, it companions. It does not demand worship, it requests fidelity. You realize, you are not here to escape the world, but to walk it as one who remembers. So you step forward, not with trumpet, but with steady feet. Not with spectacle, but with quiet power. And as you walk, the watcher within smiles. Not because the journey is done, but because you finally travel as yourself. This is integration, not arrival, but alignment. Not ending, but beginning again, this time with the whole of you walking beside you.